Thank you for watching this video. Over the last several days, my attention's been drawn back to the topic of death notifications, and that's largely because several of my clients have come in and complained about how their families have been notified of the death of a loved one. I think that it's important that we remember that death notification, if done properly, helps the individual who receives the bad news deal with the loss of a loved one and move into the future. If it's done poorly, it becomes a component of the memory picture that surrounds the death of the loved one and remains with that family forever. And so crafting a good memory picture should be a responsibility of anybody who does a death notification. I'm in Alberta, Canada, and so my comments will relate to the laws as I know them in Alberta, Canada. If you are watching this from outside of the province, you'll need to check with your local laws to make sure that you aren't contravening some form of legislation as you practice. And the reason I say this is because there are really three groups that do death notifications, at least the first notification. Having said that, that denies the absolutely terrible experience of getting a death notification over the internet on a tweet or on Facebook. One of the things that I try very hard to do is ask any clients that I deal with to tell their staff not to use social media to announce the death of a colleague. It can be terribly destructive and may increase the liability for that individual and possibly for the corporation. So the three groups that legitimately do death notifications are a medical doctor. In our province, the medical doctor cannot believe that death was caused by something suspicious, and he must have seen the client within the last 14 days in order to do a death notification. Last 14 days. The second group that can do the death notification are the coroner or members of the coroner's office, especially those who've been delegated that responsibility. And that's important because if the death has occurred under circumstances that are unexplained, there needs to be an investigation. And so in our province, the coroner, a medical doctor, has a team of medical doctors and a team of medical investigators who look into all deaths where the cause of death is undetermined or in any way suspicious. And then they will make a determination of what action needs to be taken. Our province is a large province with large areas of land that is uninhabited, if you will. And so there are small communities that are quite a distance from a coroner's office. And so the other group that do death notifications with the delegation from the coroner's office are police departments. And again, we're in a situation where the police departments, the individual members, don't like the task. They have to go out and bring bad news to a family. And that bad news generally is going to invoke fairly high levels of emotion. And nobody knows really well how to deal with that in the lay population. And so they try not to dwell with the individual they've notified. So the notifications are often really quick and the police officer exits, or they're poorly done. And so none of those groups really take time to practice the art of death notification. So I'm going to give you some hints today. The other reason that this is really important to me is straightforward. If there is a death, and let's say the doctor notifies the next of kin, that's where the doctor's responsibility ends. And now the person notified has to notify other family members and extended family members or friends or business colleagues, all of whom may be adversely affected by the bad news because of other traumas in their lives or other losses or secondary losses caused by the notification or really caused by the death of the individual. And so they need to be trained and supported because they now are becoming a part of the memory picture. I remember being notified of the death of my mother. It was a phone call from my brother, and my brother simply said, "Mom's dead. She died this morning." I wasn't prepared for it. Fortunately, I was in a place where I was supported. I was sitting so that I wasn't at risk of fainting. But it was a death notification that was not well handled. Telephone notifications, by the way, need to be done from time to time. And I'll talk about those in a moment. But more importantly, I want to talk about preparation for a death notification and then the notification itself. So when we prepare for a death notification, there are some specific things that we need to do. This research, if you will, needs to get us ready to talk to the family. Information like who is the person who should be notified? Is that person going to be available to you in your location? If not, then how are you going to notify them? Is there a cultural concern? Will they have issues associated with the death that may be the result of family relationships or disenfranchised grief? All sorts of things will have influence on the manner of the notification and the timing and the person who is notified. One of the things that we have to make sure of is that we're notifying the right person. In the United States, there are lawsuits every year because people are inappropriately notified. The wrong person is notified. We have to be aware that notification changes family dynamics and can often result in domestic violence, and there's huge cultural influence. And so we need to be aware of all of that and have done our research before we move to do the notification. I strongly recommend, and most references strongly recommend, that we notify in teams of 2. So selecting the notification team is important, and as a part of that selection process, it's important that we not select people who have suffered recent losses. I make it a policy that if I am doing this kind of work, and this includes just grief and loss counseling, if I have had a loss within 2 months, or a loss that is still weighing heavily on my mind, I will decline providing services. So we have to select the notification time and method. We have to know about the family contact. We have to know whether we're going to notify in the hospital or in the home, or whether we're going out in the field. We have to make sure that we prepare ourselves with details, as many as we can, about how the death occurred, It's really one of the questions that will be asked. Did so-and-so suffer? Was the death quick? If it's a military death or a line of duty death, then there is probably going to be a formal delegation that will do the death notification. But we may be involved as secondary notifiers, working with the family to notify others. So, we have to remember this compromises the whole family. That goes without saying. And in many times, many occurrences, it causes loss of control over components of their own life. We have to think about things like, is this going to cause secondary losses? I can remember a woman who I worked with some time ago who lost her husband, and she was a very competent woman. The family was well off and a community leader, and all of a sudden she was declining rapidly, and we couldn't figure out why. And it was because the husband always paid all the bills and she didn't know how to do it, and the bank was knocking on the door asking about the mortgage payments. And so we weren't aware of that at the time, but that was a key factor in how she was going to succeed and move into the future. We can accept personal observation as part of our knowledge of the family, but more importantly, we could check with collaterals. We have special considerations if the death is the result of AIDS, or if AIDS or drug use or psychological disorders are a part of the death, or if it's a homicide. And if it's a homicide, please remember, the police will advise what can be said and what the timing should be. Victim services is often involved, and they can be at times extremely helpful. But there are other times that they could benefit from additional training. Also, the medical examiner's investigator may be involved as well. And cooperating with as many people as possible is important. When we do death notifications, it's really important that we use a format of doing death notifications until we're comfortable in doing something more creative. I suggest you use a self-notification format, and I'm going to show you that or demonstrate that in a moment. You have to make sure that you use the words dead and death as a part of the notification, and don't use concepts like, oh, well, he's gone to sleep, or he's passed on, or is no longer with us. The one I always remember is a death notification where the policeman said to the spouse, "Are you Mrs. Jones?" "Yeah." "Is Fred Jones your husband?" "Yes, he is." "He won't be coming home." And the woman said, "That bugger. Is he in cells again? Did you lock him up because he's off drinking? When he gets home, I'm just going to rag on him." Well, the policeman all of a sudden had to backstep really quickly and address the real issue. And it became very difficult for the woman after the fact. Timing is important. One of the things that I think is really important that we recognize is people expect to be notified as soon as possible, because it allows them to feel involved in the movement, being an integral part of recovering from the tragic news. When we can, we need to travel to the home, or if it's a loss in a business, we need to go to the business. Or if we happen to be involved when the death occurs and we are doing the notification, we have to assist in getting them to the hospital whenever possible. Face-to-face is important. Telephoning the family is not the preferred choice. If we're going to do a telephone notification, I can tell you a story where it was requested by the family. Years ago, my wife and I were involved in supporting an individual who was terminally ill. And he died, and the family had instructed us to simply put notice of his death on their answering service. And so that's what we did. We phoned them up and we said, we're sorry to advise you that your brother so-and-so has died. And we've made arrangements with social services and with a specific funeral home that his body has gone to that funeral home. And I know that you didn't want to be involved in this, so we have arranged for a small memorial service. The social services is providing for the disposition of the body. And the funeral service the memorial service will be attended by a number of other people that knew him, and it's going to be on such and such a date and such a time. 24 hours before the service was to take place, I got a phone call from the brother saying, "Oh, can we attend?" And I had to tell him that it was going to be very small. I was going to offer a small eulogy. There was going to be about 10 or 12 people there, and that would be it. And he said, "No, we'd love to attend. It'll be my wife and I and a couple of other family members." And we got to the day of the memorial, and when I went to the funeral home to say our goodbyes, I turned into the room where we were going to have our small little gathering to wish this person well in the afterlife, and the room was packed. The individual, unknown to us, had been a well-known person, and when his obituary appeared, literally 150 people had made a decision to attend. 150 people. And so, what began as simply leave a message on our answering service had ended up in a major funeral for an individual who most people hadn't seen or heard for years. You need, if you're doing death notification, this is hindsight, to check back if you're given instructions to just leave a message, because it may have caused a number of other things. If you're doing telephone notification, you remember you will not be able to access family dynamics. You won't be there to watch them. You won't be able to do a suicide risk assessment. And, if there's no adult at home, what do you do if the phone is answered by a child? Always a question. Ask for an adult to call you back and advise the adult. When we do person-to-person or in-person notifications, there are some things that I think are important to be aware of, physical surroundings being one of them. Try and avoid public places. I've seen death notifications done in the hallways in hospitals. I can't tell you how distressing that is for me. Trying to separate the immediate family from others who are there to support them. And tell the immediate family, not a group. Make sure that you ask that they be seated. I remember going out to support a worksite team early in the morning, and I was told the death notification had been done. And so at the toolbox meeting, I stood up with the supervisor, and there were about 350 tradesmen there. And I expected him just to say, we're going to take time today to remember our colleague, etc., and there's a counselor here for those who need to see him. And instead, he said, well, you all know Joe Binks. Well, he's dead. And in the far left-hand corner, all of a sudden you heard crash. And one of Joe Binks's longtime friends wasn't aware that he had died, and he fainted and hit his head as he went down. Having people sit wherever you can is really quite important. It avoids that sort of incident and may save all sorts of lawsuit. Try and set it up so the family can stay in the room where the notification occurs for some time afterwards. Just allow them to get over the initial shock and the initial grief, and to make some personal plans about support. Have a telephone available for them so that they can call others that they may need to, the minister, for instance, and give a family a checklist of things to do and say when notifying others. More importantly, see if you can give them a script. So, when we talk about notification techniques, what do we need to be aware of? One, when you walk into the room, let notification occur quickly. Otherwise, notification may occur without you being involved. Personalize your dialogue to meet the immediate needs. Be aware of the surroundings and the dynamics. And make sure you use the name of the person who has died. Use a format until you're comfortable doing this on your own. Those are sort of the common things that one would be aware of. And now some of the techniques. The sequential technique. Ask the family what they know about the situation. Maybe they know that so-and-so was in a car accident. Start with what they know and bridge to what has occurred. Give information concerning resuscitation attempts, if there were any, and conclude with the victim's response to treatment, the statement of death, and a brief description of the cause, and provide only the information that you feel that they can deal with. So, self-notification is a technique that is often used. Ask the person to sit. Say, I'm so sorry. You'll often get a response, is it John? I'm so sorry. Is he hurt? I'm so very sorry. Is he dead? Yes, John died of head injuries caused by his motor vehicle crash at 9 o'clock this evening. Now that's a process of self-notification. And I would recommend you use that if the occasion is appropriate and if your relationship is appropriate. You have to remember that our news traumatizes. Our news traumatizes. And we must choose our words and our manners and the location and the content so that we minimize the trauma that we inflict, and wherever possible, we set up opportunity for healing. Our role is to be empathetic and supportive. Empathetic and supportive. Sit close to the grieving person, touch, hug, and cry according to permissions received and policies within your organization. I see nothing wrong, with tears coming to my eyes. Never reinforce denial. I'm not sure that I agree with that one. That's a common feature of most of the literature about death notifications. But perhaps they have more experience than I do. Sometimes I think denial allows the person to be like, that old expression, eating an elephant. But I don't allow denial to last any length of time. Don't suggest the use of medications. They tend just to postpone grief, and so dealing with the tragic event simply takes longer. If children are involved, make sure they're a part of the notification. Don't leave them out. I do have several other scripts for death notification, especially death notification that would be used to bring somebody to the hospital, where you don't make the notification on the phone, but rather you say, your son or your husband has been involved in an accident, and it's important that you come to the hospital. And if they ask how he's doing, you say, well, you haven't had a chance to talk to the doctor, but when they get here, you're sure that the doctor will see them, and have they got transportation so that they can get there safely but in a timely fashion. Or other ones, if you write me, McEwen at Highlander-Counselling.com, I'd be happy to give you a resource list related to death notifications. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope that you'll stay tuned, because I'm going to develop more and more of these information sessions on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, depending on my level of activity in the field. Thank you. Be safe out there.